That is the law, and that's the theory. In practice, what happens? Well, you have hostility, and hostility breaks out. And the hostility breaks out in many different forms. First of all, as I mentioned, there's a national hostility. These people are Jews, and we're Romans and Greeks. There's a difference. There's a touch of hostility there, which is expressed even in the pre-Christian period. Then you have the Christian attitude, which is the Jews are condemned because they're sinners. They didn't accept Christianity. Then you have another factor. And this, I suppose, the economic determinists would call this class struggle factor. Namely what? The poor against the rich. Poor is a relative term. What does poor mean? It depends on where you are and what you're talking about. What does rich mean? It means many things. The Talmud says, who is rich? The person who says, I've got enough. Whatever I have is enough. Well, that's a good state of mind. Therefore, according to the Talmud, I guess a man like Donald Trump would be poor because he's never satisfied. Never satisfied. So that's why the Talmud says, who is rich? The person who says, I'm happy, I got enough. In other words, rich and poor is a state of mind, and it's also a social situation, how people react to their particular condition. And I'm pointing this out because Jews have a certain attitude, which is general among the Jewish people, and that is to try to establish yourself, to have a labor or a profession, to maintain your family, to marry, settle down, have children, raise your children, provide them with an education. In other words, there are certain ways of living which became habitual among the Jewish people, and they are habitual among the Jewish people in general. I suppose other people have that too, but many people don't. So when you look upon the Jewish community, and you look upon them in a certain way, and your community is different, you may find a reason for dissatisfaction. Now, I want to tell you something very interesting. I'll quote another church father. There was a man by the name of John Chrysostom, Saint John Chrysostom. He was called John Chrysostom because those words in Greek mean golden-tongued. This man had a golden tongue. He was a great preacher, and he wrote a lot. We have a lot of the works that he wrote, and he was a great preacher. But St. John Chrysostom had a passionate hatred of the Jewish people. Like, he was really personally so resentful of the Jews. And of course, he had the Christian elements in it, other things about him. But when he talks about the Jews, he says very strange things. He says, on the one hand, these Jewish people, they're so materialistic. Look at them. They like to eat. They like to have a lot of children. I mean, these people are obsessed with the material things in life. And then he says at another time, look at the Jewish people. They take care of their families. They educate their children. They make sure that everyone in the family is taken care of. Why can't you Christians be the same? In other words, on the one hand, he's saying, look at the Jews. They lead a sober life. Look at you Christians. You're not doing the right thing. And then he says, and the Jews are such terrible people because they're so materialistic. John Chrysostom represents something. He represents this ambivalence. On the one hand, admiration for the Jewish people. On the other hand, condemning the Jewish people. It's as if he can't make up his mind and he can't really rest on it. And then he does other terrible things. He once preached a very violent sermon against the Jews and aroused his congregation, and they rushed out of the church and they ran over to the Jewish community and they began to destroy and to burn and do terrible things. So the police went over to him and they said, what are you doing? So he said, well, I was just preaching a sermon. I was just talking. I didn't tell them to go out. There was one man, a church father by the name of Marcion, in the year 190, who wrote an entirely new Bible, which he said, this is purely Christian. We have no relationship to the Jews. The Old Testament has nothing to do with us. He wrote that, and he founded his own form of Christianity, which was without Judaism, and the rest of the bishops of the church condemned him. They said, this guy he's nuts. He's a heretic. He believes falsely. No, the obligation of the church is to protect the Jews. It doesn't mean they've always done it, and they haven't done it successfully. And some of the popes were very bad when it came to that, and they didn't fulfill their role. But if you read, let's say, Pope Martin V, he feels that the Jews deserve protection. When you read the works of Gregory the Great, and even the things that were done in the Renaissance of the Pope of Leo X, I would say John the 23rd II, John the 23rd of our own time. This man, he didn't say it openly. He wasn't ready to say Pope Pius XII was a collaborator with the Nazis. But when Ralph Hochhuth wrote his play, The Deputy, in which he showed that Pope Pius XII collaborated with the Nazis, and somebody said to Pope John the 23rd, you should condemn that play. So he said, why? Why should I condemn the truth? In other words, he knew that there were certain things that were done which were wrong, but why should the church believe that the Jews have to be preserved? It's self-preservation. A true Christian knows you cannot get rid of the Jews. We depend on them. This is Christian faith. Of course, there were some who felt, yeah, we can get along without the Jews too. Martin Luther believed that they could get along without the Jews, and others did later. And of course, when we get to the 20th century, we have a lot of Christians who say, yeah, we can get rid of all the Jews, just as a lot of the Europeans are saying today. And when you ask why, it's because in Christian theology, this is essential. It's as if Christians cannot conceive of themselves as being legitimate without the background and the foundation of Judaism, which is in it. So if you read the New Testament, you'll see the Bible, the Jewish Bible, is quoted constantly. And not only that, many times they say things which are in the Jewish Bible, and they don't say, it's written there. They just say it. It's part of their language. Not only that, but when you read the sayings of Jesus and Paul, you can see that they are saying things which are in the Talmud, which means right in conformity with Jewish law at that time. And they agree with so much of Jewish law at that time. So there is an intimate bond between Judaism and Christianity, and it's difficult for many of us to realize that, because so many Christians have violated that bond time and time again.